I can't see a world in which I would be bringing my wife and children back to the UK at this point. And the things that they're going to miss is, well, everything. I love my country. I always have done, despite what some people in that country have done. So, I miss the UK. I miss parts of the UK. Of course I do. And I think it's really quite sad that I won't be able to show, my children my homeland. And I think what really worries me more than anything else about today's decision, depending on, what happens next, is that it's set a new precedent, that security can be used to control members of the family. And effectively what it does is imprison other members of the family from being able to, choose a different life. If for me, security is conditional on having an official role, one that both myself and my wife wished to carry on, but then was rejected, not by Ravek, was rejected by the royal household. And the result to that is you lose your security. That basically says that you can't live outside of their control, if you want to be safe.
Do you want the court battle to continue? Do you want to try to see this get to the Supreme Court?
I don't want any battles to continue. There is way too much suffering and way too much conflict in the world. At the heart of it is a family dispute. And it makes me really, really sad that we're sitting here today, 5 years later, where a decision that was made, most likely, in fact, I know, to keep us under the roof. But then once they realized that wasn't going to work, once they realized that, myself, my wife, and our kids are happier outside of the institution, then please just look at the facts. Look at the risks, look at the threat, look at the impact that if anything was to happen to me, my wife, or my father's grandchildren, if anything was to happen to them, look where the responsibility lies,
Greetings and welcome. There are moments in life when a person must look at everything they love and make an impossible choice. For Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, that moment arrived not in a palace corridor or courtroom, but in the quiet realization that his children would grow up as strangers to his homeland. It is a decision that has been 5 years in the making, forged in the fires of legal battles, media firestorms, and a family rift that has played out on the world stage. And yet, sitting down with the BBC in a rare and deeply personal interview, Harry did not appear as a man waging war. He appeared as a father, exhausted by the fight, but unwavering in his resolve. I can't see a world in which I would be bringing my wife and children back to the UK at this point, and the things that they're going to miss is, well, everything. I love my country. I always have done, despite what some people in that country have done. So, I miss the UK. I miss parts of the UK. Of course I do. And I think that it's really quite sad that I won't be able to show my children my homeland. This is the heart of the matter. It is easy, in the noise of tabloid headlines and royal commentary, to forget that Prince Harry is a man who once wore the uniform of his country, who served on the front lines of Afghanistan, who dedicated his youth to the institution he was born into. His love for Britain is not a talking point, it is a lived reality. He misses the green fields of his childhood, the familiar rhythms of British life, the very essence of the culture that shaped him. But love, he has learned, does not always guarantee safety. And for a father, safety must come first. I think what really worries me more than anything else about today's decision, depending on what happens next, is that it's set a new precedent that security can be used to control members of the family, and effectively what it does is imprison other members of the family for life. If for me security is conditional on having an official role, one that both myself and my wife wish to carry on, but then was rejected, not by Ravik, was rejected by the royal household, and the result to that is you lose your security, that basically says you can't live outside of their control if you want to be safe. Here, Harry articulates the central grievance that has driven his legal challenges and his public statements for years. The decision to remove his automatic right to police protection was, in his telling, not merely an administrative matter, it was a mechanism of control. He and Meghan had proposed a path forward, a hybrid model of service that would allow them to continue representing the crown while building their independent lives. That proposal was rejected, not by the independent body responsible for protecting royalty, but by the royal household itself. The consequence was swift and devastating. The security detail disappeared. The message, as Harry interprets it, was clear. If you want to be safe, you must stay where we can manage you. If you choose independence, you choose vulnerability. Do you want the court battle to continue? Do you want to try to see this get to the Supreme Court? I don't want any battles to continue. There is way too much suffering and way too much conflict in the world. At the heart of it is a family dispute, and it makes me really, really sad that we're sitting here today, 5 years later, where a decision that was made most likely, in fact, I know, to keep us under the roof, but then once they realized that that wasn't going to work, once they realized that, myself, my wife, and our kids are happier outside of the institution, then please just look at the facts, look at the risks, look at the threat, look at the impact that if anything was to happen to me, my wife, or my father's grandchildren, if anything was to happen to them, look where the responsibility lies, So there's a duty of care that has been completely thrown out the window, and that doesn't feel great. The passage of time has not healed this wound, it has deepened it. 5 years have passed since the Sussexes stepped back from royal duties, and yet the fundamental issue remains unresolved. He speaks of a decision made to keep them under the roof, a phrase that evokes the image of a family trying to contain a member who no longer fits the mold. But when it became clear that happiness lay outside of the institution, the response was not accommodation, but withdrawal. The security, the protection, the duty of care, all of it, Harry argues, was contingent on obedience, and when that obedience was no longer forthcoming, the protection was revoked. He appeals to the decision-makers to look at the facts, to acknowledge the risks, to consider the impact. What if something were to happen to his wife? What if something were to happen to his father's grandchildren? Where would responsibility lie then? It is a question that hangs in the air, unanswered. So for me, having an official role was conditional on keeping security. But for everybody else, people who have chosen this life, to enter into public office and then leave, get it for life, regardless of whether they have risk or threat to their name. And by the way, I agree with that. I think that is absolutely the right thing to do. That if you come in and you serve your country, even if it's a minimum of 4 years, that you get the protection that you require because of your public service. I was born into this position. It wasn't a choice. I've served my country for 35 years. I believe that I am still continuing to serve my country. Public service is my life. That is the dedication that will never change. This is perhaps the most compelling and logically airtight argument that Prince Harry makes. He is careful to note that he does not begrudge former prime ministers or cabinet ministers their lifetime protection. On the contrary, he believes it is absolutely right that those who choose to serve their country should be protected long after they leave office. The principle is sound. Public service carries risks, and those risks should be managed by the state. But Harry's situation is the inverse of that model. He did not choose public service, he was born into it. From the moment he entered the world as the second son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, his life was not his own. Every step he took, every word he spoke, every relationship he formed was subject to global scrutiny. He served his country for 35 years, not because he applied for the role, but because it was conferred upon him at birth. And yet, when he steps back from the formal structure of royal duties, the protection evaporates. He points to the contradiction with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. A politician who serves 4 years gets lifelong protection. A prince who serves 35 years gets nothing. And this is not about money. It is about recognition. It is about the acknowledgement that the threats he faces are not diminished by his decision to step back from royal duties. If anything, as he has argued in legal documents, the threats may have increased. The public nature of his departure, the hostility of certain sections of the press, the global attention on his family, all of these factors contribute to a threat level that remains dangerously high. And yet, the decision-makers have concluded that because he no longer holds an official role, his life does not matter in the same way. And then all the other bits and pieces that are added to that. You know, there are very, very real threats that exist out there, some that are known about, some that have been withheld. And for people in power and responsibility of decisions to know that those threats and risks exist, but to turn around and say, well, because you don't have an official role, your life doesn't actually matter anymore. Well, you can imagine how I feel about that. But you can also imagine, not even imagine, that is the most illogical argument in the history of arguments. There is a rawness to his words here, a glimpse of the anger that lies beneath the measured surface. He speaks of threats that have been withheld, a tantalizing hint that there's more to this story than the public has been told. What threats? By whom? And why would those in power choose to withhold that information? He does not elaborate, but the implication is clear. There is a dossier of dangers that the relevant authorities possess, and yet they have chosen to act as though those dangers do not exist. The logic, he says, is not just flawed, it is the most illogical argument in the history of arguments. For a man who has spent years in courtrooms and negotiations, who has pored over legal documents and security assessments, this is not hyperbole. It is the conclusion of a mind that has exhausted every possible avenue of reason. At this point, I'm feeling very let down. You know, it's the minority of people, especially those that read the tabloids and the press themselves. The press themselves have incited so much hatred towards myself, my wife, and even our children that that's hard to forgive. I actually couldn't believe it. I thought with all the disagreements and all of the chaos that's happening, the one thing that I could rely on is my family keeping me safe. And not only did they decide to remove my security in the UK, but they also signaled to every single government around the world not to protect us. This is the betrayal that cuts deepest. Harry has spoken before about the role of the press, about the racism and hatred that has been directed at his wife, about the relentless negativity that permeated their lives in the UK. But here, he links the press directly to the security issue. The incitement of hatred, he argues, creates the very threats that make security necessary. And yet, rather than shielding his family from those threats, the institutions that should have protected them instead withdrew. He had believed, perhaps naively, that despite all the disagreements, all the chaos, the one thing he could rely on was his family keeping him safe. That belief has been shattered, and the damage extends far beyond the borders of the UK. When the British government removed his automatic security, it sent a signal to every other nation on Earth. This man, this prince, is no longer deserving of protection. If you see him coming, you do not need to treat him as a member of the royal family. You do not need to extend the courtesies and protections that would normally accompany a senior royal. He is, in the eyes of his own government, a private citizen, regardless of the threats that follow him. The consequences of this are profound. It means that when Harry travels to the Invictus Games, the international sporting event he founded for wounded service members, he does so without the umbrella of state protection. It means that when he visits other countries for charitable work, he must rely on private security, which, while expensive, lacks the intelligence networks and tactical coordination of government agencies. It means that his children, Archie and Lilibet, inherit not only his title, but his vulnerability. And all of this, he argues, flows from a single decision: to make security conditional on obedience. It is a decision that has not only exiled him from his homeland, but has made the entire world a less safe place for his family. I would love reconciliation with my family. There's no point in continuing to fight anymore. As I said, life is precious. I don't know how much longer my father has. He won't speak to me because of the security stuff, but it would be nice to reconcile. In these words, the warrior lays down his sword. For all the legal battles, all the interviews, all the painful revelations, Prince Harry ends not with a demand, but with a plea. He wants reconciliation. He wants to stop fighting. Life, he says, is precious, and in that simple phrase, there is a recognition that time is running out. His father, King Charles III, is not a young man. The monarchy has faced its own health scares, its own transitions, and yet Harry reveals they are not speaking. The wall between them is built of this security dispute, a bureaucratic issue that has become an emotional chasm. He does not know how much longer his father has, and the uncertainty weighs on him. To reconcile, to find a way back to some semblance of family, would mean everything. As I learned through the First Nations throughout Canada, because of the Invictus Games, their goal in life was always truth and reconciliation. And I turned around to them in many conversations, and they said, right, but reconciliation can't come without truth. Well, I've now found out the truth. I've shared some of it with you today. A lot of it exists out there, whether people choose to ignore it or not. So it would be nice to have that reconciliation part now. If they don't want that, that's entirely up to them. There is a deep wisdom in this passage, drawn from Harry's work with Indigenous communities in Canada. The Invictus Games, which he founded in 2014, have taken him to places where he has learned from people who have endured their own generational traumas. The First Nations taught him about the inseparable link between truth and reconciliation. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot heal a wound if you refuse to acknowledge that it exists. For Harry, the truth is now known. He has laid it out in court documents, in interviews, in the pages of his memoir. The threats are real. The security was withdrawn as a form of control. The press incited hatred. The family institution chose institutional interests over familial duty. That is the truth as he sees it. And now he's ready for the next step. He is ready for reconciliation. But he cannot force it. The ball, as he acknowledges, is not in his court. If his family does not want reconciliation, if they prefer to maintain the distance, that is entirely up to them. There is a dignity in this position, a refusal to beg for what should have been freely given. He has done his part, he has spoken his truth, he has left the door open. What happens next is not his decision. For those watching, the interview leaves a complex impression. Here is a man who has everything, by many measures: a loving wife, healthy children, a life of purpose and meaning in California. And yet, there is a hollowness, a loss that no amount of sunshine can fill. He misses his country. He misses his family. He wants to show his children the land where he grew up, the places that shaped him. But he cannot because the price of entry is a price he is no longer willing to pay. His children's safety, his wife's well-being, his own peace of mind, these are not negotiable. And until the system recognizes that the threats he faces are not contingent on his official role, until the duty of care is restored, he will remain an ocean away. The tragedy of Prince Harry's situation is that it did not have to be this way. He did not choose to be born a prince. He did not choose the threats that come with that birthright. He did not choose to have his wife and children targeted by hatred. All he wanted, it seems, was a life where his family could be safe, where he could continue his public service on his own terms, where the institutions that should have protected him did not use security as a leash. That, he has learned, was too much to ask, and so he has made his choice. His children will not grow up in the UK. They will not know the green fields of his childhood, the familiar streets of London, the peculiar rhythms of British life. They will know their father's homeland through stories and photographs, through the occasional visit that must be carefully planned around security concerns, through the lens of a life lived in exile. But there is hope in his words as well. He speaks of reconciliation as something he still wants, still hopes for. He mentions his father with a tenderness that suggests the door, though heavy, is not locked. He has learned from the First Nations that truth must come before reconciliation, and he has done the hard work of telling that truth. Now he waits. It is not a passive waiting, but a patient one. He has built a life, a good life, for his family. He continues his public service through the Invictus Games, through his charitable work, through the foundation he built with Meghan. He is not waiting for permission to exist. He is waiting for the people who owe him a duty of care to finally recognize that duty. If they do not, he will survive. He has survived worse. But the sadness will remain, the quiet grief of a man who loves his country but cannot bring his children home. That is the story that Prince Harry told the BBC. It is not a story of anger, though there is anger there. It is not a story of victimhood, though there is pain there. It is, at its core, a story of love. Love for his wife, love for his children, love for the country that shaped him, love for the family he still hopes to reconcile with. And in that love, there is a lesson for all of us. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not to fight, but to walk away. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is to keep his children safe, even if it means keeping them from the place he once called home. Prince Harry has made his choice. Now it is up to the rest of them to decide whether they will meet him halfway.